Welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Today, my guest is Richard Parker. Richard has been helping people achieve their dreams of owning a business for over 30 years. His How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price program has sold over 100,000 copies in more than 80 countries. Can't wait to get into this, but he partnered with Ray Dalio in the Dalio family office for 4 years in an investment firm. And Richard, I don't want to spoil the rest. How are you doing today? How is it in Florida?
I'm doing great. It's always nice in Florida.
Always sunny.
It's
Unless,
yeah,
except if
we
it
don't get
rains for an
much rain
hour.
here. Yeah, we rains for an hour. Changed a little bit over the years, but yes, predominantly the moisture goes west from the ocean and then heads back east, and like 4 to 6 o'clock in the afternoon, you get a good storm. Well, that's changed a little bit over the years, but yeah, we don't get much rain here. It's a great place.
Very cool. Very different from where you grew up, I understand. We talked a little bit. I know we noticed for those that are watching and instead of listening, there's a Montreal Canadiens jersey behind you.
Yes.
Um, what was it like being a French Canadian?
Well, I grew up, my mother tongue is English, but growing up in Montreal and Quebec, where it's 80% population is French, obviously you have to be bilingual. I was bilingual pretty early when I did most of my, probably, I mean, 90% of my business in French. So it was great. I mean, it's wonderful to learn another language. When I go back and visit now, it takes me like a day to stop translating in my head. When people say something and then you sort of translate it. So it takes me usually a day. I've been living in Florida for almost 30 years. But yeah, it was and still is it's a great culture. It's like, a lot of European influence. So it's very different compared to a lot of North American cities, and your family's from there as well. So you're familiar with it. And you're talking about the Canadiens jersey. That jersey gets hung up the second the Buffalo Bills get eliminated from the playoffs every year, as they typically do. And then the Canadiens jersey goes up. So the Josh Allen jersey gets swapped out for the Canadiens jersey.
I will say though, as far as sports references go, Josh Allen winning the MVP this year, I think it was well deserved.
Yes.
What a great guy, what a great role model. Um, I did grow up, you know, not in Quebec area, but my family, like we talked about before, was from there. So I would often, with my grandfather growing up, watch either the Canadiens if
Yes.
it was in season, Montreal Expos. He was a huge fan,
Yes,
big
indeed.
fan of the Expos. But really boxing. So I'm almost positive I watched. Well, I was around at the time when um, Mike Tyson infamously bit Evander Holyfield's ear
Yes.
in
Yes.
Canada, and I see that you have the Muhammad Ali behind there. So are you also a boxing fan?
Well, my dad was a huge boxing fan, and it's funny you should mention the Mike Tyson because I don't know if you recall, I had watched that fight. I guess it would have been a middleweight fight or welterweight fight with Ray Boom Boom Mancini and Duke Koo Kim from Korea,
Mhm.
and he died. The Korean fighter got killed he suffered a brain injury and died. And it was probably the greatest fight I'd ever seen. And I was so upset afterwards that I said, I'm not going to watch boxing ever again. And I
Oh,
stopped watching it for years and years. I mean, I don't know what the time frame was. It's got to be 15 years. And then my then brother-in-law, they were going out one night. They were going to go watch the Tyson Holyfield fight, and I said, "Okay, I'll just for being social, I'll go." But I didn't want to watch boxing because I
oh no,
and,
that was that was the fight after the
and of
one.
all the fights that I picked to watch after all those years, right? And I said, you know what? The heck with this. That's it. I'm totally done. Totally done. But my father was a huge fight fan. He fought when he was a kid. I mean, he was like Rain Man of boxing, right? Really knew his stuff. He was a big
Yeah.
hockey player as well. Um, but yeah, that was my experience with boxing. But that image, the Muhammad Ali picture standing over Sonny Liston, that and my two favorite sports pictures are that and the one of Bobby Orr scoring the game-winning Stanley Cup goal in 1971 when he's flying through the air. And I have that one upstairs. I found that in a consignment shop of all places, signed by him. It was a
Oh, yeah.
furniture consignment shop. The guy didn't even know what it was. I said, "Oh, that's a great picture." I said, "How much you selling it for?" And I'm thinking he's going to say like 10 grand, right?
Yeah.
Signed. It had all the authentication documents with it. And I was with my son, who's a huge hockey player and fan. And in my mind, he's going to ask 10 grand. I said, "How much money?" He said, "I have no idea what this thing is. I don't know. You want to give me $200?" I said, "Done."
Oh
So
my goodness. You
that's it. Yeah,
made nine
yeah,
thousand eight
that's
hundred
hanging
dollars
upstairs. Yeah,
That is
crazy.
so cool, man. Yeah, fighting, I will tell you, I think I got the love of that from, my family. That was one thing that they would always get together
Right.
and do. And I was a fighter for a little bit before I really, actually, I think because I tried to be a professional fighter, I went down the course and had some fights.
Wow.
And got those, like you said, those brain injuries. You sit behind a computer and you can't really look at the screen because the bright lights, and you're like, okay, that's enough. Like I have a job to do, and that was when I called it
Right,
quits.
right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, and it happens. Like also, my son, played a lot of high level hockey and had a couple of concussions. And at some point, you just got to say, like, you keep going, you're gonna have scrambled eggs for brains, and you're gonna need your brain forever. So, yeah, those concussions, they've learned a lot. They've come so far. I remember when you were a kid, they said you got your bell rung, get back in, rub some
Yeah,
dirt on it, rub some dirt on it, and
that's
get back
it.
in there. Now there's a very, there's a very specific protocol, and it's really well managed, but it's still your brain. You got one brain, so you got to take care of it.
Yeah, my friends in the fight game would call it drain damage. They go, once you start mixing up your letters and it's no longer brain damage, it's drain damage, then you're kind of, um, I did visit TriStar Gym in Montreal, the home of Georges St. Pierre, my favorite
Yes,
fighter of all time.
yes.
That might have been one of the highlights of my fighting career. Going, driving through Montreal and going up in this I don't know where in the city it was. I think it was the northwest side. Anyway, so big affinity with Montreal and Canada, very close to the
Nice
heart.
connection.
Yeah, nice connection. So Richard, you said that you've been in Florida for 30 years, but what was your journey like in the beginning? I know mentioned you did a lot of business in Quebec and French speaking people. What was it like in the early career? And when you were growing up, did you have that in mind that you'd be doing what you were doing, or how'd you get into it?
Yeah, kind of interesting. I think I was always entrepreneurial. I grew up in a suburb of Montreal. My parents were hardworking people, which lower middle class, hardworking neighborhood. Not necessarily a blue collar neighborhood, but lower white collar type of neighborhood. But everybody went to work every day. No one was wealthy. Everybody worked hard to put food on the table, what have you. Um, but I always was entrepreneurial. Always had something going. In Montreal, you have the benefit of as a kid, where you have these crazy snowstorms. You don't get them as bad as they used to, but was
Mhm.
always shoveling neighbors' walkways for money or delivering newspapers. Always had something going, DJing. Always had something going, and was always encouraged in my family. My parents were as generous as they could be, and I always, I enjoyed telling the story that my dad would, whenever, as long as I had a job, and this is like 12 years old and older, as long as I had a job, my dad would always ask me, do you need a few bucks? And if I didn't have a job at that point, he'd never offer. It was a very interesting lesson. Like if you're going to go out and help yourself, then I'm always willing to help you. But if you're not going to help yourself, then don't come to me for money. And I worked in a gas station. Some of your listeners wouldn't even remember there was days when you actually had someone come out and put gas in your car, wash the
New
windows,
Jersey
check
still
the.
does that.
Oh
That might
yeah,
be the
right.
only
That's
place.
right. New Jersey. But didn't they just not long ago pass a law that they're going to be able to go to self-service, or is that still in
Oh,
place? I thought
I
they were
the
talking
last
about allowing it.
I drove through New Jersey 6 months ago, and we got our gas pumped, and I was like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" He's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I guess I'm from Pennsylvania."
Right. I had the same thing driving from Connecticut to Florida. and pulling in, and I just went right over to pump, and a guy came flying out of the building like, what are you doing? Right? Yeah, I didn't realize that. So, but in the old days, you went in and pulled into the station. They drove over like a tube, and it rang a bell inside the gas station. You ran outside, you put gas in someone's car, you checked their oil, washed their windows, checked their tires if they needed it. And so I did so I always had something going. And then I went after I started working, so again, the point being, I always had something. There was always, an element of entrepreneurship or working, probably less entrepreneurship than it was like you have to work, right?
Sure.
That was just the rule in the
You
house.
you
And
made a quote there, Richard, that rings very true to how I was raised as well. My grandfather wasn't always outwardly with his religious beliefs, but he would say that, God helps those that help themselves. Same thing with your father. I'll give you a few bucks if you're working, but if you're not working, I'm not going to even
you're
give
on
you
your
money.
own. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's right. You want to help people, but you've got to help yourself. Barring, physical, mental illness, etc. I mean, you got to help yourself. I mean, there's just no excuse. Then after I started working at a couple of jobs, and then I was involved in a company. I went up the ladder pretty quickly. The company was growing exponentially. I was 29 years old. I was their uh, went from national sales manager to VP running a division, and it was only because the company was growing by leaps and bounds, and we're trying to fill holes with personnel. I was probably way over my head, or probably would have been another 10 years at another company to be in a similar position. But the company was growing exponentially, um, and then I did. Something really stupid, which is I took a good portion of what I had saved up and put it into the stock market. And someone had
Oh,
told me about this idea about buying stock on margin, which was, you could buy double the amount of stock for the same amount of money. When the stock goes up, you sell it and you repay the money. Well, it sounds great, but they don't tell you what happens when the stock goes down. And the stock completely shit the bed. I
oh
lost
no.
$60,000, which was in 1990, which represented pretty much everything that I'd saved up. I had
That's like
actually
a
sold
hundred
part of.
and twenty,
Oh yeah,
$150,000
more than that.
today.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Whew.
And I realized that, I'm not going to get out of this hole. I had my first child on the way. I have four kids, and said there's only way I'm going to get out of this is I've got to put myself in a position where there's no limit on my upside income potential. And I loved where I was working. No one was going to pay me more than I was already making. I was making $72,000 at that point a year, which
Yeah,
was
that's
pretty
good.
good. And there was a transaction within the company I was working for. They were selling the division that I was working for. A company was buying it, and they wanted me to keep running it. But I worked out a deal with them that I would take over basically representation and distribution of the line in exchange for training someone, teaching someone how to, take over management of the business. And so,
Hmm.
my financial catastrophe really forced my hand to make a decision. I didn't have any options, so making decision was real easy, right? If you don't have options, very easy to make decisions.
Yeah, yeah.
And so my only decision was I've got to put myself into a situation where I don't have a limit to my upside. And I ended up going into that, starting that. And within a few months of doing that, I realized that it would be a great way to grow this business if I bought a similar company, not necessarily competitive, but something similar. So, in other words, I was selling these infant products to major retailers. I was going to visit, I had nice relationships with them and said, hey, I'm already going on this sales call. I'm already selling them product. I already got this distribution. Why don't I figure out how to get more products to sell to the same people? And I ended up making a small acquisition of an ancillary company, consumer products, and that started the world of entrepreneurship. I bought the first company with the last 30 grand I had. So I had 90, I pissed away 60, I was left with 30, kid on the way,
Oh
and
my.
took the last 30 and threw the dice.
As much as I love talking about these sports stories that get me excited, these entrepreneurial stories get me even more so because a lot of people they lose in the stock market. They're like, "Oh man, oh poor me," down in the dumps. And you basically took that loss and made a huge win within a short period of time.
Yeah, it was pretty quick, and it was a good win. It
Yeah.
it became huge years down the road, but it really was a good win. And whenever I tell this story to someone, if I'm doing any presentation or a group or whatever, it's really the impetus becomes doing something, right?
Yes.
Very like oftentimes in the world of individuals who want to get into a business or buy a business or start a business or start a side hustle or what have you, getting out of the gate is oftentimes the hardest thing. And there's a lot of naysayers around, you know, family, friends who some are jealous, some don't want you to be hurt for whatever reason. But you get a lot of feedback often to not do something.
And they're always right until they're not right.
And they're not right. And it's like if you happen to fail, it's a I told you so. If you happen to succeed, it's like, oh, I knew he would be successful, you know.
I it's funny how that
But
works.
yeah, but
It's true.
you have to take the step. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's a small step because depending on your current life situation or what have you, in my particular circumstance, I just felt that I didn't have a choice. I mean, that was
Mm.
I could have just kept working. I don't know how I would have ever got recouped that money because the bills were going to be coming fast and furious, a kid on the way. Um, and so, expenses only grow. And so, for me, it was a very easy decision. I know it isn't for some people, but for me,
Well,
it was very easy.
the term decision, decide, side is like Latin for to kill. So it's like decide just means eliminating options. And when you
Right.
have no other options, of course, it's an easy decision. But I love the story of an entrepreneur that has their back against the wall and they go in, and I think the best cure to a loss is to go get your next win. Like, don't wait.
Amen to that.
Like the only way that you really lose, like I think in the grand scheme of things, I want to hear your thoughts on this, is when you stop trying. Because if you try enough times, you will eventually win, and then you only need to win. Like, it's not like sports where, in boxing there could be a 12 round fight and you lose the one round, you know, you lose rounds 1 through 11, right? But you can go in the 12th round and knock them out and still win.
You still win. Right.
Yeah.
And there's no 13th round. So you've got to get
Yes.
it done in 12.
Yes.
It's I've had the luxury and blessing of working with lots of entrepreneurs over the years and some ridiculously successful people. And I'm hard pressed to think of any scenario where successful people, business success, where they didn't have a couple of good failures. And so it's what you learn from it. And the proverbial pick yourself up, do all that. But the truth is that if you learn from those situations and try to make yourself insulate yourself a little bit, try to make yourself bulletproof, don't get deterred. You just got to pick yourself up and go again.
I I also think, not only from business acumen, but just telling a good story. Can you tell me any story that's memorable that doesn't have conflict, that doesn't have obstacles to overcome? Like, I don't think it exists.
It doesn't exist. When you reflect back on life events, business events, what have you, you tend to eliminate or forget some of the heartburn around those scenarios, right? Things that worked out well. You focus more on a good outcome, but when you really drill down to it, there's very few successful outcomes that didn't come with a lot of heartburn.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just me, I'm built weird, but sometimes I can remember being in the moment of those heartburn moments of struggle, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait for this to end. And then once that's years in the past, you're like, I kind of miss what life was like back then. Like, it loses all of the sting over time
It loses the sting. Yeah, that
once you
correct.
move on.
Correct. It's exactly it. It loses the sting over time.
So you made your first acquisition around the time of your first child. Love the timing there. You've then since done over a dozen more acquisitions. Can
Yes.
you walk me through that process? Like, did it just like going from I found that going from 0 to 1 is like the hardest, and then going from one to others is becomes momentum. Was it built like that, or was there some twists and turns?
Always twists and turns, but it's a very good summary. It is momentum. It becomes addictive in a way, especially for business owners, small business owners who take a step and try to grow through acquisition, realize pretty quickly how effective that is versus organic growth. I mean, there's some situations around it that you have to work out and do it in a good way. But the idea, I think you become somewhat of a business junkie if you enjoy if you enjoy the process, if you enjoy the hunt and you enjoy the kill, meaning you enjoy the process by which you find a business, investigate it, learn about it, able to put a transaction together with someone on the other side. Um, and for me, it's always been done in a way, if you can establish a good, meaningful relationship with the individual on the other side of the table, you typically can find a way to get deals done. And I just found the whole universe of acquisitions, to me was like my crack, right? I mean, I just got a real buzz out of it. And then what comes after, which is, the building of the business, or, really immersing yourself in a business. I've typically been more in an owner operator position, at least for a period of time, to really learn the business, and grow it, sell it, keep it, whatever makes the most sense at the time. But it was, the evolution to me, as I look back, it seemed pretty logical. It might have been crazy at certain times, but it was pretty logical that was my path, and got great joy from it. I mean, it was just really, really, there's the one part was growing the business. The other times I've gone into businesses that had nothing related to another business that I was involved in. I made plenty of mistakes, bought a couple of really crappy businesses, learned from those as well. And it's just, the whole buffet together is, what makes the story and makes you hopefully better, smarter, and learn a little bit along the way.
Yeah, you're like a living example of the quote that success is just going from one failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm, right? Because
Yeah,
I
correct.
mean, and you have plenty of successes, but like if you would have, the approach that you took, were like, yeah, there were some the bad deals in the buffet, but overall it was a great thing. And it's like, what a simple, like concise way to just like that gets me so fired up and motivated to hear it that way because I'm from where I'm at, I'm like, the answer is just to do more. Like,
Do
it's a
more.
healthy
Yeah.
crack. Like, if you can find crack that's healthy, why not be addicted to it?
Why not be a crack addict? And you're going to make mistakes. I mean,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course. I mean, nothing's, but you just try to avoid making big ones. And
Hmm.
when for we talked a little bit about sports, but when you think about the baseball analogy, like if you str if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you're going to get into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's actually
Like, if
incredibly.
30% success rate, right? You're a superstar. Now, when you're dealing with people's money, your own money, people's money, investments, work, professional, your profession, you've got other interests, other obligations, etc. Of course, there's there's caution that comes with it. I don't think buying businesses are risky. I mean, when you mitigate the risk, there's some element. They're not a gamble. I mean, I never look at it as a gamble. When I say it's not risky, there is some element of risk. So you want to try to mitigate that to the best of your ability, but you can't eliminate all of it.
But there
And
is some controls that you have versus the
lots of
stock
controls.
versus the your the stock market play you had, where like it wasn't your performance that made the stock lose, it was your choice. Whereas with
Was
business, you
being
get
an
to wake
idiot.
up every check.
That's what it was.
So, so
Yeah, and
you,
there is, of course, from my perspective, I think going to work for someone is much riskier.
mm,
Especially you have a big company, all of a sudden they have one bad quarter to lay off 1,500 people, right? You are doing your job every day. You have no options necessarily for growth, or the growth is stagnated. You're not controlling your own destiny. There's always a limit on your upside. Very often it's hard to get gratification from work. Being in your own business is not necessarily about the money. It's, the joy that you get from working, the opportunity to build something, help the lives of other people, um, being excited about being able to make an impact every day. You can get up and think about how do I get bigger, better, faster. I mean, there's a lot of sidebars to business ownership that aren't just money.
amen. I there's so much that I could piggyback off that, but one thing I'll say is, um, when you work for somebody and you have a background in sales, so you definitely can relate to the sales analogy. Whenever whenever someone's an employee, they work for somebody else, and that's their all source of income. They're always selling to the person that writes their paychecks that their
Yeah.
services, their time is a worthwhile investment for their business. But when you
Yes.
own a business, you can sell to X amount of the market. And I'll use my own business example. I could have 10 clients, one could leave, and that's 10% of my business that takes a hit, but not the 90% still preserved. And I could
Still
go get
preserved.
another client
And you can
because
go get
I
it or two.
or two.
And
So
sometimes, in business, when you do have, using your example is a great example because you have 10 clients, one leaves, and you take a hit, a short-term hit. Business people, and you see it repeatedly, that motivates them to say, hey, I don't want to get stuck on 10 clients. I need to get 12. Because if one leaves, I'll still be at 11. Like, I don't want that vulnerability. So, and you have the ability in your own control to go out and make magic happen. And it's not for everyone. There's employees, there's employers, but and and I'm no genius, so it's like it's not overly difficult. But there are, if your boss comes in and reams you out and you start worrying about your work, well, you're sitting on pins and needles every day about whether or not you're going to have a job. Compare and contrast that to the example you gave and saying, you're theoretically your boss, your client fired you, so now you just have to go out and replace them or get a couple of them. And you very often don't have those options when you work for somebody. You're stuck.
I think that also sales, having a background and experience in sales, might be the most valuable skill set. Like to learn, if you're going to take a job, I would say that my wife and I are probably on the same page. We have one daughter. Hopefully,
Nice.
want to grow the family. I think that I would prefer if my daughter did at least a year of sales after high school, between college if she wanted to then make a decision, because I think that's like the foundational skill set, depending on what you do, right? Because you did sales and you
Yes.
did sales leadership, and then look, you went into private equity and mergers and acquisitions. But one of the things you mentioned about it, which was incredibly key, was that your ability to empathize with the person on the other side of the table makes the deal, whether it's more likely to happen, smoother, more enjoyable, more fun. And when if someone is just spends all their time behind a computer with spreadsheets and they don't do sales, they might have a great financial model, but like if you can't connect with the seller or the buyer,
Yeah.
you don't think the deal may blow up. It could rub
The
them the
deal
wrong
could
way.
blow up. It's yeah, it's an interesting way that you put it because, and especially encouraging your daughter to sell, because the reality is, if you can sell, you could always make a living.
Yeah.
The
You just
companies always need sales.
yeah.
And so if you have an ability to sell, and it comes with a lot of double clicks as to what makes a good salesperson, depending on the industry, but the ability to go out and walk into a strange environment, meaning, a purchasing agent or a prospect, and not having the concern or fear of walking into something new and being able to present the product in a good, thoughtful way, but having that skill set is it truly is an incredible skill because you can always make a living no matter what happens.
Absolutely. So I want to pivot and ask you, during the timeline of your career with your 13 that you purchased on your own and you had a co-investment for 14, like are you still doing M&A, or did you pivot out of the career? Like what was the timeline with that, and where are you up to now?
So in the early 2000s, I had a failed transaction, which I decided to walk from the transaction just during due diligence. There was
Hmm.
just decided to not go through with the transaction. And at that point, it was only because I had done a number of acquisitions that I was able to recognize where the skeletons were. The company wasn't fraudulent or anything, but there was just too much. It was like a plate of spaghetti. I could never figure out this business,
Right.
the way the financials were worked, and they had a number of different companies, and there was some commingling. Again, nothing fraudulent. It was just if one
Mu-
company was short of money, they took it from the other. It was a big mess.
Too much headache, and
Yeah.
was the juice wasn't worth the squeeze at that time.
100%, exactly. And decided to walk from the deal. And it really intrigued me because I recognized at that point that like the average person who didn't have any familiarity with um, business purchases more than likely would have gone ahead with that purchase, and it would have turned into some big problems. And that really intrigued me, is like, what does the average person do who's looking to, change their life, buy a franchise, start a business, buy a business, etc. Mostly in the world of buying businesses, because that's what I've done. Like, what do they do to educate themselves? How do they go about the process? And I ended up taking off a year and learning about the universe of small business acquisitions outside of what I was doing on my own, and like what people do. I spoke to a ton of individuals who buy businesses, others who buy businesses and were successful, others who bought and failed, business brokers, bankers, business owners, and recognized there were really no good tools for people. And I said, I really want to be able to help people. I've been very blessed in my career at that point.
I don't know what happened when it glitched, but we're back. All right.
We're back, baby.
Video
Okay.
editor, thank goodness that we have one of those. You're gonna have
Yeah,
some fun
right.
time.
Okay. We'll put them to work.
But
So
you
yeah, so I,
identified that there was these knowledge gaps between
knowledge gaps, huge knowledge gaps.
the everyday, the person that wants to go from 0 to 1, right?
Yes.
You've done a dozen plus, you took some time off to reflect on what you've learned, and you're like, look, let's go back to the beginning, and like how much is different is the way I see things versus going from 0 to 1. And I'll tell you a
Exactly.
quick story, Richard, because the reason I smiled and laughed earlier, the first acquisition I did was off of the back of a failed. I was actually going to go into real estate investing, multifamily unit syndication. We had a
Right.
218 door as my first deal ever,
Wow.
and that was signed the day before COVID. So in Pennsylvania, it was the only
So like in
state.
March 2020.
Yeah, exactly. And Pennsylvania is the only state where it was deemed non-essential. So like no real estate, no nothing was going on. And we're like, oh, what do we do? So I just started to, try to go out and sell. And we made the decision within 30 days to like look at private equity, because we're like, oh, if this business is now in trouble, probably some others are as well. I walked into an interview. The guy wanted marketing help, and at the end we had a LOI, a 2 hour conversation, first meeting. And I look back and I'm like, wow, that was really easy. That was the
That's
only easy
unreal.
thing. Everything else was a mess, and
Right.
and when we got into due diligence, we're like, oh, what did we get ourselves into? But I mean, not that it was a bad experience. It was just makes sense as my first. And I was like,
Right.
never doing something this messy again.
Right.
But that's why I laughed, because I'm like, I would have showed have read your book before that. But then, you can't change the past.
No, but
Lessons learned the hard way.
yeah, but lessons are learned.
Mm-hmm.
And when if you go back and reflect, say, there's certain things that you should have known about better, and it's really not not negligence. It's, I understand how an individual, for example, like in your situation or something similar, was looking to buy a business or whatever. The only thing that you could really pull from that may be similar to that point in most people's lives is how they bought a house.
Mm-hmm.
And said, well, it's a little more effective or efficient now that every listing is online, but they went out, they went to an open house, they saw something, they spoke to the agent helped them, pretty much through the process. And they got a closing agent, they made an offer, they got accepted, they got an inspection, they got their mortgage, but there are all these pieces involved with the process where there's professionals involved and some help more than others. But those points of what had to be done, there was someone taking charge of each of those points. So that's their only point of comparison. When you buy a business, you have none of those. Zero, none of those. And buying a business, and even for those who vested in real estate, like, time heals every real estate error. But if you overpay for a property, as long as you can service the debt, in a year from now, the building is still going to be standing.
Right.
With a business, you buy the wrong business, in a year from now, you're going to be bankrupt, if not sooner. And so you don't have any of these resources to the extent that you have in a lot of real estate transactions. So the average person, it's understandable to me how they would not be aware, or have this, they might have this thought or just, idea that I'm going to have these people to help me. And when it comes to buying a business, you don't have any of that. Your lawyers don't negotiate transactions.
No.
Business brokers typically work for the seller or represent the deal. They don't represent
Yep.
the buyer. You can hire an accountant to do the financial review or the due diligence, but they can't value businesses despite what, and I'll have that argument all day long with every accountant. They
I'll
value
agree with
businesses.
you.
Yeah,
I'll
I mean, you're
agree
right.
with
They
you.
value it based on, assets versus income. And someone, when you buy a business, you're looking to replace or generate an income typically.
Yeah.
So all these things, that knowledge gap, as you referred to, I get it. Like I understand why it's there. And it takes sometimes people getting into the process and realize, hell, I've been looking to buy a business for 3 months, and I'm like going backwards. And
Mm.
so oftentimes, people need to go through a little bit of pain to recognize they need to get a better, a better resource, a better
So
knowledge base.
for the entrepreneurs out there that that watch this episode and made it this far, I want to make something very clear with what you said, which is incredibly important. If you're built like an entrepreneur or someone that has sales or someone that's hungry, wants to, use their skill set to just grow things, the growth mindset, just know that just like your parents, when they don't believe in you in the beginning and say, "Oh, get a day job," it'll never work out. The lawyers and accountants, their job is similar but different. They're to mitigate risk. Lawyers are
Yes,
there for compliance purposes to keep your butt safe, make sure you don't get, in any trouble or avoid risk. Accountants, same thing. They look at the books, they make sure everything needs to be clean and it has to make sense on paper. But entrepreneurs see something that doesn't exist yet, that can't
correct.
exist in the future. So like if you listen to everybody else but not yourself, and if you don't take action because of advice, then take the advice, like listen to it, but like at the end of the day, if you see something that makes sense to you, that's who generates the economy, in my opinion, is those people that see something that doesn't yet exist. And we're back. Thank you to Dave, who is our video editor, who will do a great job of making sure this is all cleaned up.
Cleaned up, seamless as could be. Right.
Yes, that's it. Richard, we've talked a lot about lessons learned and how you've identified knowledge gaps. Someone who is hanging up on my bookshelf, maybe out of frame right now, Ray Dalio has helped countless people with his books and his knowledge gap. I understand that you worked alongside of him. Can you tell me how that all came to be?
Yeah, I actually am looking at your bookshelf to see if I could spot it. I probably have to put my glass on. Yeah, but he's written a couple of great books. I mean, Principles is certainly one that
Uh,
you
I,
spotting it now?
I see it. It's staring right at me. It's over there.
Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, Principles is definitely a book that I would tell anybody to read. Employee, employer, doesn't matter. I mean, it's an incredible, insightful book, and in a lot of ways will change the way you approach a lot of events. I mean, and again, it could be business, personal, relationships, business ownership, etc. Great book. So going back probably, oh my God, 15 years, 18 years, I got a call one day from somebody, and they identified themselves as, they said their name is Ray Dalio, and which meant nothing to me. And he said, his son at that point was living in Florida, and he got my name as an individual. He got my name from a couple of people. His son was looking to acquire a business, and he wanted to hire someone to uh, teach his son Devin, how to buy businesses or to help him through the process. And at that point in time, that was like within a couple of weeks of my youngest son, who's now in his 20s, he had just been diagnosed with epilepsy.
Mm.
And I had told this individual, this Ray individual, said, look, I appreciate it, but I'm not taking on any more clients because, I told him the situation with my son. I said, I want to devote the next few months to learning about this condition because I know nothing about it. And he was very nice. He said, I have some connections to these some doctors and physicians and medical industry. And so if I could be of any help to you whatsoever, please feel free, reach out anytime. And I'm happy to put you in touch with these people. And I thought that was really nice and kind and sincere. And I said to myself, just based on that gesture alone, at the very least, I should meet with his son. Right, because just an exchange of courtesy or kindness, if you will,
Yeah.
and decided to meet, and I said, you know what, I'll meet with, I'll meet with your son. And I met his son, Devin, who was in his late 20s at the time. And I thought he was a terrific kid, really nice, really smart, very engaged, and really, really wanted to get into the world of buying businesses, or at least acquiring one to start. And I was really taken with him. And again, he was really nice. He was really smart and very focused on buying a small business. And so I called this Ray fellow back and told him that I work with him, because I did a lot of consulting at that point, and I'd written my
Hmm.
course, How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price. It was very popular, and that's a part of, I guess, how Ray got to me. And Devin and I started working together. We met once a week. His the you know the he was going to he studied the course lesson by lesson. We had homework. And then after a couple of months, we started looking at visiting businesses. And we worked together for about 6 or 7 months, and probably well into the time together, again, right around that period, probably about 6 months in, he had mentioned something to me. He was a very unassuming guy, Devin. And he had mentioned something to me that I thought for myself. I said, that I think this kid might come from a pretty significant family. I had never I don't think that way. Like, I don't measure
Yeah.
people up by any. It was just a guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, I'm gonna go. I'll Google them. And I look up like Ray Dalio, and they used to have like that sidebar where they have an individual's picture up. And I said, holy smokes, like, $10 billion or whatever. I said, okay, I guess it is a pretty significant family.
Yeah. You had a hunch. You were right.
Yeah, and this is like way, way into our relationship. And
Hmm.
and after a period of time, again, it was not long thereafter, their family had just started their family office. They had a few people, and the thinking was that it may be better off for Devin to get engaged, get engaged with the family office, and you probably have some really good learning there, and you can always revisit buying a business. I thought it was a real great idea, and that's the decision was made. Devin was going to go work in the family office, and he was put off buying businesses for a while. Then you fast forwarded about 10 years after, Devin had rose to the point of being the co-CEO of the Dalio family office, which went from like 3 people to probably well over 100 today.
Hmm.
And Devin and I had stayed in touch, and we he'd called me and said, he was thinking about leaving the family office. He wanted to start acquiring businesses. He was thinking of relocating, moving down to Florida, and he'd spoken to his father about it. His father said, why don't you call Richard? If Richard will do it with you, like, I'll be much more in favor of it, because you'll have a mentor and having someone who's gone through it. So I was just in the process of moving I do a lot of buy side and sell side representation. I was going to move my M&A, my intermediary work, or my investment banking firm, to another, merging it with another company within days. And so Devin and Ray called me. This was like on a Sunday, and
Oh my
said to me,
goodness.
what's your timing? I said, well, it's like terrible and terrific, right? Like, I'm starting to hire some people and steal away people like in 72 hours now. I've got some people that I want to take away from some other firms. So we actually put our deal together in minutes. And we decided that we were going to open up an investment firm, mini PE. My
Mhm.
role was, I was hired to, on a full-time basis, to mentor Devin. But we were partners. Devin, myself, and Ray were partners in the business. Ray was going to be our investor. And I guess when you have an investor like Ray, you don't need other investors. And
Yeah.
we embarked
Raising
upon our
capital is not a problem anymore.
capital's not a problem. And we embarked upon our career, and Devin and I, and we operated independently. I mean,
Hmm.
not autonomously, but independently. So we reported to the family office, but we worked on our own. We had separate premises in Connecticut. I was commuting to Florida every week, and Devin and I did our thing. Ray was, he really wasn't very involved. He let us do our thing. When we had investments, we presented it to him or the trustees, but he really let us do our thing. We had all the benefit of the learnings from Bridgewater and the way they operate, and the good parts of their culture that were really, really helpful. We had access to everybody, anybody we wanted. And Devin and I set about, two-prong really, which was, one, me teaching him, and two, us making investments. We made a number of them. He and I we shared an office. We had multiple offices where we were, but we liked sharing an office. We sat and looked at each other like this, like you and I look at each other every day, 6 feet away from each other, bouncing ideas off each other. We explored a bunch of different things where we wanted to play and what have you. And he and I were, we had an unbelievable trusting business relationship. We had a cherished friendship. He and I became, really close like brothers. And then, as I'm sure you read about, in December of 17th in 2020, Devin was killed in a car accident. Um, and young guy, he was 42 years old, a young child, and he was, which was obviously
It's
devastating.
tragic.
Um, I mean, devastating to me, not even close to to the impact on his family. And he was truly the nicest, smartest guy I had ever met. Devin. I mean, really was. I mean, it was just an unbelievable combination. And when you layer in the fact of where he came from, like it would be very easy to be entitled. It would be
Of
very easy to
course.
be a shithead. It would
Almost
be very
expected.
like, and like it was 180 degrees to the opposite. His siblings are like that the same way. I mean, it's testimony to Ray and his wife, how they raised their boys. When I had a lot of connections within the world of PE, and we'd have these meetings, and I'd bring Devin, and of course bring Devin. We'd go to these meetings together, and there was a lot of learning that we were both going through. And you'd get a lot of people on the other side that they were intrigued to see what is this like, what is the persona of a son of someone like
Sure.
Ray? And they have these preconceived notions. And I told him, I said, you're gonna love this guy. Like,
Yeah.
and we'd have these meetings, and Devin, he was just a plain straightforward guy. I mean, super bright. But afterwards, I mean, every single time, without exception, I'd get a call afterwards, and they'd say something along the lines of, I can't believe what a nice guy he is. Because he was, I mean, and brilliant. I mean, ridiculously smart, super quick study. Um, and so that was my experience, Ray. It's unbelievable. I mean, we're consider myself extended family to the Dalios and vice versa. We are we're bound together in sorrow and memory forever. The last few years, I spent more time with Devin than anybody else. And so it's very helpful. We have, we talk frequently, we meet up, and it's very helpful to, to just, to talk through memories, because him and I had this glorious relationship. And it was also, I think it proved very helpful to the family that we can have these, conversations and talk about Devin and honor his memory. And it was just, catastrophic. And
Man, I want
we
to I
remain
just
very
want to
close.
I want to say something that you're really making me think about some big picture ideas, and one of them is, you know, other people from the outside that don't have that close relationship have these preconceived judgments and they have all these ideas. Whereas when Ray called you up, you didn't know who the Dalios were at the time. You were just like, hey, I'm concerned about taking care of my family. And Ray probably, whether consciously or unconsciously, was like, same. And probably respected the hell out of that from
Right.
right off the jump, because you just treat people like a person. And the things you've said about Devin are just like such a testimony to his character, but about his character, about kind he was, and how
Empathetic
down
and
down to
philanthropic.
earth
Yes. Yeah.
and a good person. And it seems
Oh,
like
to the core. Yeah.
and it seemed
Really a beautiful soul. And his siblings, I like that. I mean, just, yeah.
and I think that's such a testament, right? At the end of the day, like what kind of impact or how did you make other people feel, right? It's not what you say or did,
Yes.
it's how you make people feel. And it seems like he nailed that in his legacy. And it also makes me think of the Shakespearean memento mori, which is like remember that someday you too will die. It's like when people
Yes.
in a beautiful way, because it makes you cherish the moments for when they are, because everything comes and goes, and what really lives is the impact that you have on others.
The impact that you have on others. And, it's a great point, because like if you even, continue along the lines of Ray and his family, like if you were to spend any time with Ray, you would realize he's very smart.
Yeah,
But you wouldn't have any insight into his wealth, because he's just one of the boys who happens to be ridiculously successful.
yeah.
And his family, his wife, the sons. I mean, they're all the same way. And I I'm never remember someone asking me something about like, are you intimidated? Well, I mean, first of all, he's my buddy's dad. Okay, so like that's one thing, but like I'm not intimidated. I'm in awe like of his accomplishments, but not intimidated. Like, and I think, with a lot of social media and what have you, people get enamored with people for all the wrong reasons. And one of the things that I've tried to impart and on students of ours or other people or entrepreneurs that are looking to, to buy businesses and go back to this, there's nothing more important than establishing meaningful relationships with people.
I
That's the premise by which relationships, whether they're transactional or ongoing,
right.
when you want to buy someone's business as an example, and I appreciate you pointing it out. I've always thought that way. I'm not impressed with someone because they have a lot of money. I'm impressed with someone because they're, good to their core. And I'm not impressed if they're a shithead. I don't care how much money they have. And I think most people by and
I
large are like that
agree.
as well. Yeah,
I
like
I like to believe so.
yeah,
I would
I
really
think
like to
most
believe
people are
so.
like that. But
Yeah.
when you get into conversations and you're talking about, wanting your daughter to learn how to sell, or when you got into some of these transaction conversations, I know sitting across from, a potential a business that an owner of a business that I'm going to acquire, or a prospective client. And I wrote a post recently about this for people that are looking to buy businesses. Forget about the numbers. The numbers are the numbers. Numbers don't lie. People lie. The
Yeah.
numbers are the numbers. They are or they aren't. But you have all these other pieces to the business. But the most important thing that you need to do is establish a meaningful relationship with the person on the other side. Because you do that, you can figure out everything. If you establish trust and credibility, you can figure out a way to get a transactional relationship.
And
That's
uh,
the easy part.
the antithesis to that is if there is no trusted relationship, if the relationship is tenuous at best and awful at worst, who cares what the numbers look like,
Yeah, and you're
right?
not going to get to the finish line.
It doesn't matter what it says on
Yeah,
paper if the human connection is not there, it's going to be a bunk deal.
you're never going to get to the finish line. I mean, if there's
Yeah.
not trust established, and especially like if you have, you mentioned a lot of your listeners are business owners. If you want to grow your business through, acquisition, and you start meeting with competitors, well, you have to be infinitely more sensitive to the fact that people don't want to disclose some of that information because it is sensitive and it is competitive, and neither do you want to disclose it. So the whole thing is to go down the road and establish a nice relationship with the individual before getting neurotic about and getting into the weeds about I need to know your margins and what your the recurring revenue percentage, like all this nitty gritty shit that's so unimportant, right? Like get to know the person, make sure you
Yeah.
like them, you trust them, and if you can get this relationship going, you could always figure out a way to do business.
Oh, Richard, man, I just want to point out something to you, and please take it as a compliment. It is so refreshing to hear these lessons from you, knowing that like you grew up in Laval. You didn't have like some highfalutin MBA, PhD, some big
Never went to
academic.
college.
Yeah, didn't go to college, CJEP, whatever,
CJ,
that.
I did went to CJ, but not university. Right. Look, I'm
Okay.
very impressed. You know that, right?
Oh, I of course. Uh I would be an imposter if I didn't, right?
Right, right.
But
Thank
like
you.
I've been to Laval. I know the area. Like to hear for you to be it just reaffirms my belief that it doesn't matter what you have on paper, it doesn't matter your credentials. It's like what you do day in and day out. And your whole thing was, hey, let's get busy. Like, people help those that help themselves. And it's just such a reaffirming, overarching refreshing story to hear how, someone from Laval could do what you're doing. It's great.
It's very simple. Right. Yeah. Well, thank you. I
It,
really appreciate that
it's
compliment.
simple, but it's not easy,
No, you
right?
know what? But that's a perfect way. Yeah, it's simple but not easy, and people tend to overcomplicate. Yeah, I saw this. I don't know if you saw these. They have like this master class, which like they have people from Richard Branson, and they have Martin
Mhm.
Scorsese in these interviews. It's my kids got me it for a subscription for Father's Day, and there's some great, really talented people, and all things from from cuisine to gardening to filmmaking to business. I mean, it's really good stuff. And Richard Branson is one of them in there now. And I also subsequent to that watched a documentary on him. And one of the things that he said when they were looking at all these different businesses, because they knew nothing about publishing, they knew nothing about cell business, they knew nothing about the airline business, about the cruise business. He always had the attitude of screw it, let's do it.
I I want to tell you a quick story because I think you'll
Tell me a
appreciate
long one. I'm enjoying your company.
it. I have a cousin. His name's Yves Tuga. Yves,
That's a
uh,
good French Canadian name.
may we very
May
it's
we?
he's as French as they come. So Yves was like, I'm gonna get the dates wrong, probably 10 years older than me. So when he was in high school, driving around with girlfriends, captain the hockey team, I thought he was the man, right?
Right.
And I was like, I want to be just like you. And then Yves turned 18 and lost his sight like overnight, right between high school graduation and CJET, where he was going
Lost
to play
his
hockey.
sight?
Had a very rare disease called Leber's disease and
Oh
went
my
completely
God.
blind, which was devastating. Like we didn't even know that was a thing. Like everyone was like, "What's going on?"
Oh
So
my God.
we did, my family in the United States, family in Canada, everything we could, but like still, you know, it, anyway, complicated thing. Reason I share that story is because he speaks to since then, okay, he is has his own massage therapy practice, so he's a masseuse. He's done like Jean-Claude Van Damme, other, he lives in downtown Montreal. He's got it going on. He became the what do they call it, disabled or handicap athlete of the year
Yes.
for bodybuilding, which is probably kind of hard to do as
Holy
a
smokes.
blind person. He actively does boxing lessons at the gym that he would attend. And he then got onto a cable television show. I think it's called Maxime et Eve, where they travel around and do like cuisine tasting, and he does like motivational speaking. So the reason I share the story about Eve is
Wow.
because when you talk to him, one of his taglines is, "Well, I get to live a pretty rich life, and I'm blind. So what's your excuse? You have your eyes."
That's great.
Yeah, you know. So I
Hits
think you two.
that hits home, right? I mean, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And anyway, I feel like sharing that story
So
because
there's nothing he can't do like except drive a car. Like
yeah, I
he
mean, he lives
just
on his own. He
lives
lives
on
by
his own,
himself, has his own
travels,
business, travels.
does boxing, massage therapist, runs a business. I mean, when you think about someone like that, I love what he says. What's your excuse? Because I don't want to be dismissive or whatever, but the reality is a lot of people it's too easy to find excuses. What an unbelievably empowering story. And he does motivational talk speeches.
I think so. I think
He
so.
should.
Yeah.
What a beautiful life he's carved out.
Yeah. And but your story is kind of like, you didn't go blind, but you've had your setbacks and stuff. But
Yeah, not
you're
even
both
close
like
to
down to
Eve.
earth. Like you both come across as like, hey, do the things. It's I think we've talked about this offline, but it's like, don't worry about perfect situations. Don't worry about this. Like, what kind of impact can you put on other people? And like, what are you doing daily to improve your situation and the situation of others, really?
Right.
And I think, there's a lot of correlations between the messages you guys have. So that's really powerful
Thank
stuff.
you. I appreciate it. Yeah, if you in any business, if you take the approach to like a helping approach, sincere helping approach, whether it be, even if you're out selling clients or whatever. I mean, I think if you have the approach, I'm going to help them and solve their problem, or going to help, what it may be self-serving because you're going to get some business from it, of course, but it's from a different mindset. I appreciate the compliment. That's very kind of you. I am not in Eve Tuga's league in any way, shape, or form. What he has done is unbelievable. And send him that message the next time you speak to him that he made another fan, because that story is just phenomenal.
Well, I truly appreciate that. I'm sure he will as well. I have another question for you while we're
Yes.
still connecting. It's really we've touched on it and we've talked about it. It's been incredibly inspirational to me, but I'm going to ask it outright. One of my favorite questions, right? I call it the grandfather paradox. So if you are where you're at this point in time, and there was a time machine where you could have a conversation with yourself at 8 years old, before you were out there shoveling snow and collecting the dollars from your neighbors in the neighborhood, your entrepreneurial journey, and you could talk to yourself at the end of the day. Maybe that's 80 years old or 90 years old. Like you're sitting there, you're like where Warren Buffett's at, right? At his age. Like, how would those conversations go? What would you want to say and what would you want to ask them?
Ask them.
Hmm.
Well, I know what I'd probably tell them, the 8-year-old. I'd probably tell them, don't grow up. because it's much more fun if you're always a kid, at least the kid's attitude. Um, I th I think if I were to tell the 8-year-old, if an 8-year-old you could understand, I would tell the 8-year-old as you grow up, never don't worry about being right. Just worry about getting it right or doing the right thing. Just don't worry about being right. It's not important. Things along those lines of being judgmental or certainly about being right, because I know in my early years that was always problematic. So I would really um, guide them to not think about being right, just getting it right. The question that I would ask them is, I think an 8-year-old might be a little young, but if they could project out at that point, um, it would probably be from a standpoint, if you could do anything in the future and you were guaranteed not to fail, whatever that is, do that.
Mm, hmm, man.
You can't guarantee someone success, but I think we get hindered by thinking that we're going to fail. So that would probably be what I would ask them. What is it that you want to do that would get if you that you're guaranteed not to fail?
Maintain childlike attitude and eliminate fear of failure.
Yeah, I mean, when when you look at people who have like into their teens, adulthood, whatever, that they're childlike. I mean, it's really envious, right? I mean, if
Oh
you have
yeah.
that attitude, 'cause, it's not being negligent, but that sort of ability to
To have
just bounce
fun
off,
and
have fun,
play.
let things roll off your duck like water off a duck's back,
Yeah.
that type of stuff. And at 80, if I had to ask my 80-year-old self, it would probably be like, where have you wasted your time?
Mm, that's the first time I've heard that answer. It's really good.
That would probably be the question.
So that you
That was a
just
tough
discontinue,
question, but
you
they're
just
great
discontinue wasting
questions.
time. That's like
That's
because it's the only thing you don't, at the end of the day, you're like, all right,
all we
well,
got, baby.
that's all we got.
That's all we got.
Huh.
And it's really, really limited. And as you get older, I guess you get more philosophical because, it's, when you're 8 years old, you don't think about this stuff. And like I know at my age, like I'm not a golfer, but like I'm on the 15th hole now, like, so,
Mm,
yeah, that would be the questions. That's a great question for you, by the way. That's thought provoking.
man, that's such an interesting thing. Um, I'm gonna get out of my deep thought. I'll think about that deeply after our
Okay,
conversation.
perfect. Well,
But
great. I
I will
enjoyed
I will
talking with
ask
you.
I will ask one more
Sure.
question to follow up on that is if you could have one hope for your kids, because you said you have four children.
Yes. One grandson, another one on the way. Yes.
If you could have one goal for your family life, what would
For
that
my
goal be?
family life?
Yeah, yeah, for your kids, like
Yeah.
what is the goal, that you would have as a father, right? Because the reason I started doing what I'm doing is I was in mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and I was taking calls and meetings and emails during delivery of my first daughter, and whether it was my wife who was like in labor screaming at me, get off my phone, or the nurse being like, put that thing away, or God or whomever being like, you're doing it wrong, brother. I made the decision then and there that like I was not going to sacrifice anything for the thing that I wanted most, which is my family.
Right.
So, uh, business aside, right, as family focused, what are any tips you'd have for like me or people in general on like fatherhood and entrepreneurship?
My besides loving them, taking care of them, protecting them, making sure they're safe, what have you, my overarching theme to the most important role that I identified early on being a father was I wanted, barring any of my kids having any, physical, mental illness, etc. I believe that my job was to make sure my kids are independent thinkers, independent, that they don't have to, my daughters don't have to rely on a husband, could get married, but independent. So to me, independence was was, still is everything. I mean, I want my kids to be independent. I
Man.
don't, I don't want them moving back in the house for sure, but
You can come visit, but like leave eventually.
yeah, like you listen, once you're off the payroll, you're off the payroll. But really wanted to do whatever I could to the best of my ability to instill in them complete independence. And that's be independent thinkers and be able to survive and thrive independently on their own. Whatever that looked like.
Everyone listening, we didn't rehearse that answer. I know the tagline for the show is to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Really, independence would be the one word that would sum up that those core values of the American dream. Love, love that answer a lot. Not going to ask you any more questions because we're not going to top it. The only other thing is, Richard, where can people that are listening that want to connect and learn more, where can they find you?
The easiest place is go to richardparker.com. I mean, that's the website or the hub where we have a bunch of educational materials for business buyers or prospective business buyers. But on the contact page, if someone has a question that's separate and apart from what we provide there, and someone has a question related to business or their own bit, I mean, just use the contact email and just let them ask them to forward it to me personally. And I'm happy to, I love engaging with business owners or would-be business owners or wannabe business owners. So happy to answer any emails. And again, it's easy, richardparker.com.
Well, that's it for today's conversation. Truly appreciate our guest, Richard. For everyone listening, I don't run ads in the show. I don't try to sell you anything. The only thing I ask is if you enjoyed it and you thought this was a valuable conversation, the only way the show grows is through word of mouth, and sharing with a friend would mean the world to me. Hopefully, it can help them too. Until next time, everyone be well.